My name is Isolda. I'm 33 years old, an interior designer living in Denver, Colorado. From the outside, my life might seem unremarkable, a single mother, working hard, raising my 9-year-old son with my own effort. But few people know that I was once treated by my own family as an extra, a nameless shadow under the spotlight of my younger sister, Kendra. And then, at her lavish wedding, just as the music swelled and the lights beamed down on the glittering stage, Kendra turned, looked straight at me among the crowd, and threw her bouquet hard into my chest. Her lips curled into a cold smile. "You'll never be anything except my faint shadow." The entire hall burst into laughter, but at that very moment, I pulled a paper from my bag, held it high. A contract that made the stage lights flicker and wiped the smile right off Kendra's face. Have you ever been made into a joke by your own family in front of hundreds of eyes? What would you do if you were trampled on during what was supposed to be the most sacred day for the family? Leave a comment if this story stirs something in you. Hit like if you've ever been belittled in your own family. Subscribe to the channel to hear the full story of how I stepped out of the shadows, reclaimed my voice, and protected my son from a toxic cycle. Because right after this, everything was only beginning. My name is Isolda, 33 years old, now living with my son in a small house in the south of Denver, Colorado. I'm an interior designer. It's not as glamorous as people think, but enough for me to live true to myself, and enough to build a home for Aiden, my only child. I'm not the type to talk much about the past, but there are things that, if left unsaid, no one would understand why I stood silently at that wedding reception, one hand holding a contract, the other clutching my son's hand, and shed not a single tear when the entire hall mocked me. I grew up in a 3-bedroom house in the suburbs of Boulder, where my father, Richard, was a civil engineer, and my mother, Diane, taught English at the local high school. We weren't rich, but we weren't lacking either. The only thing missing was that love was never shared equally. I was the eldest, and my sister, Kendra, was 2 years younger. From the very beginning, everything revolved around her. Kendra liked to sing, so my mother immediately enrolled her in vocal lessons, hired a private tutor, organized family showcases so she could be praised. I was good at drawing, even won a statewide art contest in 5th grade, but my mother only shrugged and said, "A certificate doesn't pay the electric bill." When I applied to design school in Santa Fe, I researched everything myself, prepared my own applications, and spent the whole summer working at the library just to afford the application fees. Meanwhile, Kendra was taken by my parents to tour Ivy League campuses, hired SAT prep specialists, and eventually got into NYU with all expenses, tuition, housing, meals covered by the family. When I got accepted, no one asked how I felt. My mother only said, "Don't drop out halfway and embarrass the family." I remember clearly I gave a faint smile, turned away, and left with an old suitcase and a Nokia phone with a cracked screen. No tears. No hug. In the years that followed, I didn't come home much. To call it home didn't feel right because no one was really waiting for me there. My father was quiet, always avoiding emotional conversations. My mother was too busy managing Kendra's schedule. Whenever I had news, like being hired at a Denver design firm or being chosen as lead designer on a corporate office project, my mother only responded flatly, "Good, but why didn't you call sooner?" Kendra just got interviewed for a magazine. I gradually learned to stop telling them anything. I met Aiden's father during a project presentation. He was a structural engineer, smart, kind, and patient. But marriage doesn't always follow the path we imagine. When Aiden was 3, his father transferred to Canada, at first temporarily, then permanently. We separated amicably. He still sends child support faithfully, but most of the time, I'm the one handling everything. There were no grandparents visiting, no phone calls when Aiden got sick. But I refused to complain. I threw myself into work, designing everything from tiny apartments in aging complexes to offices without phone lines yet installed. Each completed project reminded me, as long as I keep going, I don't need anyone's recognition. I lived with that mindset for years, until Kendra announced her wedding. A gold-trimmed invitation arrived at my office. No greeting, not a single handwritten note, just my name, address, and a printed line. "We are honored to invite you to celebrate with the family." I noticed a red pen circle around the reception section, with a handwritten note in blue ink. "You'll have a speaking role if you sponsor the main decor package." I laughed, but it wasn't joy. A few weeks later, my mother called. Her voice was soft, but filled with calculation. "You know, Kendra deserves a perfect day, but the costs keep rising fast. Help out a little. At least you're her sister." I paused, then answered firmly, "I've saved money for Aiden's future." "You know that. I can't use it for anyone else, not even family." On the other end, a sigh struck my ear. "Aiden again. Everything about you always revolves around that boy." "What about the family, Isolde?" I said nothing. She hung up first. Aiden stood by the table, holding his third-grade English book, and asked softly, "Mom, doesn't Grandma like me?" I hugged him close, my chest tight but my voice steady. "It's not your fault, Aiden. Some people only know how to love what reflects themselves. He isn't like them, and that makes me proud." I didn't say all of that aloud, but every day, every step, I lived with one conviction: to protect him from the wound I grew up with. I didn't want Aiden to live in anyone's shadow. That's why I stood my ground on that stage, watching Kendra tilt her chin at me with the bouquet in her hand, spitting out her cruel words, while the hall erupted in laughter as if it were just a family joke. But no one laughed for long, because after that moment, they would never look at me the same way again. They couldn't laugh for long, because right after Kendra hurled the bouquet at me, in front of hundreds of amused faces at the family prank, I pulled out a neatly folded, plastic-sealed paper from my bag, raised it high, and spoke clearly. In fact, the entire design for today's event was created by my company, from the color scheme, lighting, to the patterns on the ceiling. And here, this is the official signed contract. Silence. Kendra froze. My mother, Diane, whipped around to look at me, as if someone had just spilled red wine all over the bride's gown. I stood tall, not rushing to explain, not needing applause. I was simply returning to them a truth they had always refused to see. I had founded my company 5 years earlier from a tiny rented office in an old Denver building. Back then, Aiden was in preschool, and I had just quit a prestigious design firm because I couldn't bear the constant condescension and the judgmental looks at my being a single mother. No one invested. No one advised or mentored me. I did everything myself: designing, meeting clients, running ads, even hauling sample boards to meetings in an old SUV that needed 2 turns of the key to start. In the beginning, I took the smallest jobs: one-bedroom apartments, cafes before opening day, windowless offices. Each satisfied client was an opportunity. I didn't wear designer clothes or heavy makeup, but I never missed a deadline. Then came the big break, from a woman named Marlene Jennings, creative director of a chain of luxury wellness centers. She happened to stop by a cafe I had designed, impressed by the way the sunlight hit the glass without blinding readers, and decided to call me. That project was a turning point, and I didn't waste it. After nearly a year of work, I delivered the space in full and received my first payment larger than my total income from the previous 2 years combined. I didn't buy a handbag. I didn't upgrade my car. I opened a separate savings account for Aiden. Every month, I set aside a portion of my earnings into it, like a ritual no one knew about. Each deposit carried the same note: for you to choose your own path. By Aiden's ninth birthday, that fund had reached $50,000. I didn't tell anyone. No one in the family knew that the woman they still called the dim sister was living in a nearly 3,000 square foot house in the Denver suburbs. Every corner of it designed by my own hands, each light, each curtain a reflection of my belief that I could create a kinder world with my own work. My mother never visited. Kendra never asked. To them, I was still the tired girl, struggling with life, always lacking, never achieving. I wasn't angry, not even that sad anymore, because after all these years, I realized their recognition wasn't what I was waiting for. Nods and compliments, if not born of understanding and respect, were just empty shells. One evening, while Aiden was doing homework at the kitchen table, he asked, "Mom, why don't Grandma and Aunt Kendra ever say you're good at things?" I put my hand on his shoulder. "Because they never really looked closely, sweetheart. Some people spend their whole lives only seeing what they want to see." He nodded. No further questions. He's a quiet child, thoughtful beyond his years. I've tried to teach him not to resent, even though I had to learn that lesson myself while growing up. I hadn't had the chance to say any of this for years. But standing in that lavish wedding hall, in front of the guests' astonished faces, I understood that moment wasn't just an answer to a bouquet thrown with disdain. It was the opening of a door for a truth that had to be spoken. Not to prove I was talented, but to show Aiden that his mother, the woman the family once turned their back on, hadn't fallen. And more importantly, to show him that you can rewrite how people treat you simply by choosing how you live. It all began a few months before Kendra's wedding, when I came home after a long afternoon meeting. On the kitchen table, my phone blinked with a missed call from my mother. I stared at the screen, my finger hovering between calling back and just making dinner for Aiden. Finally, I pressed call. Diane's voice came quickly, unusually eager. "Isolde, are you free? I need to talk about something important." I leaned against the sink, hearing the TV in the living room where Aiden was watching. "I'm listening, Mom. Go ahead. I want you to help Kendra with the wedding costs. Not too much, just about 25,000. Think of it as sisters sharing the load, family celebrating together." I stayed silent for a few seconds. That sentence felt like a knife straight into the gap that had never been closed between me and them. "I can't," I replied, quiet but firm. "That money is Aiden's education fund. I've been saving it since he was very little. It can't be taken away just for a single day, even if that day is Kendra's wedding." My mother sighed, not bothering to hide her disappointment. "You always think only of yourself and your son. Family isn't just about one person. I thought you had grown up more than this." "Being grown up doesn't mean sacrificing unconditionally, Mom," I answered. "I can't give up my child's future as a wedding gift for anyone." She hung up without saying goodbye. 3 days later, an email landed in my company inbox from my mother's own address. I still keep it to this day. The message was short, with 3 attached images: the reception seating chart, a sketch of the guest greeting area, and a budget estimate. The final line read, "You can choose this package if you can't contribute financially. The floral design and lighting alone would help a great deal." I read it over and over, not finding a single word of concern. No mention of me, Aiden, or the work I was doing. Only support, conditions, and numbers. That night, I didn't reply. Instead, I sat with Aiden on the back porch. June evenings in Denver are mild, with a light breeze and the scent of pine drifting through. Aiden lay with his head in my lap, eyes fixed on his book, but his hand still clutched mine out of habit. "You seem sad, Mom," he said softly, eyes never leaving the page. "I'm fine," I smiled, brushing his forehead. "It's just that some people don't understand what truly matters." "Like me?" "Yes, like you. Like your dreams. Like being able to choose the school you want and live the life you deserve. Aiden turned to look at me, his expression unusually serious. If they make you pay, would you be sad if no one in the family talks to you anymore? I froze. I've already gotten used to that, I said quietly. What I'll never get used to is you having to give up something just to keep other people happy. A few weeks later, I got a call from Kendra. She didn't call often, so when her name popped up on my screen, I knew it wasn't to check in. Her voice was flat, with no attempt to hide her intent. I heard from Mom you're not contributing anything to the wedding. That's right, I replied plainly. I explained the reason to her. You can say you don't care, Kendra sneered. But you can't blame anyone for seeing you as selfish. I took a deep breath. If selfish means protecting my child, then I accept that. You're always like this, always playing the victim. Mom has given her all to both of us, but you only know how to let go. You live shut off, avoiding the family, then come back with that holier-than-thou tone, like everyone owes you something. I kept my voice calm, though my throat had gone dry. No one owes anyone. But if you want to talk about debts, then I owe myself a youth that was never acknowledged, and I owe Aiden a mother who won't let him grow up surrounded by favoritism and cruelty. Kendra gave a short, mocking laugh. And what can you do, Isolde? A wedding flower contract, a tearful speech? Who would stand by you in a celebration where everyone's attention is on me? I stayed silent. Not because I had nothing to say, but because nothing needed to be said. I didn't need anyone to stand with me. I just needed to stand firm. And that's exactly what I was doing day by day, hour by hour, with choices not glamorous but solid enough that no one could shake them. I arrived in New York on Friday morning, 2 days before the wedding. The flight was a little over 3 hours, but I didn't feel tired, only strangely hollow inside. Aiden sat next to me, dozing against the plane window, his head resting on my shoulder, arms clutching his favorite science book. I booked a hotel for just the two of us, about a 10-minute cab ride from the wedding venue. No one in the family offered us a place to stay, nor did they ask when we'd be arriving. The next day, I took Aiden to get a haircut and found a small suit that fit his slender frame perfectly. I wore a light blue silk dress, simple in design with a slightly off-shoulder neckline. I had added an inner lining myself for comfort. With light makeup and my hair in a low bun, the woman in the mirror didn't look radiant, but calm. Calm to the point that I wasn't sure if it came from acceptance or from calluses built over years of being unseen. The wedding was held at a well-known hotel in the heart of Manhattan. The main hall was lavishly decorated with high ceilings and chandeliers, dropping down like waterfalls of light. White roses and orchids were everywhere, with scented candles lining the aisle, casting a warm yet distant glow. I led Aiden inside. The moment we entered, a few heads turned. Their surprise quickly shifted to indifference, as though my presence wasn't something anyone had really wanted. A staff member approached. "Your name?" "Isolde Layton," I answered. He checked his iPad, then smiled politely. "Your table is number 23, left corner near the service area." I nodded, squeezed Aiden's hand, and walked toward it. The front tables were draped in white linen, with gold silk chair covers and tall, fresh floral arrangements. Table 23 was much lower, tucked near where servers came and went, dimly lit, with a food cart parked nearby. I pulled out a chair for Aiden and asked softly, "Are you hungry?" "Not yet, Mom." He looked around, then whispered, "Why is our table here?" I smiled, though my throat felt dry. "Because it's close to the exit. I like it. It'll be easier to leave early." Aiden said nothing more. His eyes wandered to the other tables where guests laughed and clinked wine glasses under the chandeliers. A few relatives I recognized were there, but none came over. Kendra appeared almost an hour later, to applause and soft background music. She wore a crystal-embellished mermaid gown with a plunging neckline, her long curls cascading topped with a small tiara, a symbol of her absolute center stage. Guests gasped, some whispering, "She looks like a princess." My mother followed close behind, beaming brighter than the bride herself, clutching Kendra's hand as if she were the one being honored. I didn't stand. Neither did Aiden. I squeezed his hand under the table, a silent message. Later, my mother swept past our table. She didn't stop, only cast a quick glance and said to someone beside her, "At least she showed up." Aiden turned to me, asking quietly, "Was Grandma talking about you?" I pressed my lips together. "It's fine, sweetheart." He lowered his eyes. "Mom, why doesn't Grandma love you?" The question pierced deeper than he could know. I knelt beside his chair, looking him straight in the eyes. "Some people, they love in the way they understand, but that way isn't always right. I can't make someone love me, but I can love you enough so you'll never feel unloved." Aiden didn't answer. He wrapped his arms around my neck and held tight. I stood, keeping him close, as if letting go would shatter everything. The music signaled the ceremony was about to begin. I sat down, pulled Aiden's chair nearer, and patted his back gently. I looked toward the stage, where Kendra and the groom Matthew prepared to exchange vows. I had met Matthew once, at a short family meeting when he was still the new boyfriend. He hadn't said much. Tall, sharp-eyed, the kind of man who had probably thrived in business until he got caught in my family's grip. Under the dazzling lights, Kendra smiled brilliantly. She was beautiful, that much was undeniable. But beneath the makeup, I could see what others didn't. Someone who had lived her entire life, only to be validated, praised, lifted high, no matter the cost. I had once been the shadow behind that light, and I was still standing here, but I no longer bowed my head. Not because I cared about winning or losing, but because I couldn't let my son see his mother pushed down ever again. No one knew that inside the small bag under my chair lay a carefully sealed file stamped by the event company. And on the top of that contract was my signature, along with the words, "Lead designer for wedding venue, Isolde Layton." The music ended after the vows, and applause roared across the hall. I stayed seated, my hand on Aiden's shoulder. He looked up at me, uncertain. I gave him a reassuring smile, though my heart was pounding slower than usual, as if sensing something was about to happen. Kendra stepped down the main aisle, holding Matthew's hand. They stopped before the microphone at center stage. A hotel staffer adjusted the stand, then stepped back. Kendra cleared her throat, her face glowing not just with makeup but with pride pushed to its extreme. "Thank you all for being here today," she began, her voice clear, brimming with satisfaction. "This is the happiest day of my life, not only because I married this wonderful man, but because I get to share it with the people I love most." She turned toward my mother. Diane stood beside her, gripping her daughter's hand as if they had just won a competition together. "Family is everything," Kendra continued. "We can't choose where we're born, but we can choose how we treat each other. And for me, unity and love are more than words." She paused, then glanced quickly in my direction. A chill ran down my spine. "I'd like to invite someone special up here to share a few words," she said, flashing a sly smile completely different from what the guests had just witnessed during the vows. "Isolde, could you come up?" I heard murmurs from the nearby tables. Aiden squeezed my hand. "You don't have to go, Mom," he whispered. "It's okay," I whispered back. I stood, smoothed my dress, and walked slowly down the aisle as heads began to turn. I stepped onto the stage, lights still blazing. Matthew shifted aside, surprised, his eyes cautious but silent. I reached Kendra and my mother. My sister smiled at me as though this were some tender family moment. My mother didn't smile, she only stared, as if waiting for me to recite my lines. Dear sister, Kendra began, her voice dripping with sweetness. I think today is the perfect time for you to share what you promised Mom and me about the special wedding gift for this celebration. I didn't react right away. I looked straight into Kendra's eyes, then turned to my mother. Her gaze was empty, but the corner of her lips curled slightly. Why don't you tell everyone about the $25,000 you promised for my wedding? The hall began to stir. Some guests turned to each other, a few chuckled. I could feel the shift in the air pressing down on me, as though I had just become the lead in an unannounced comedy. I took half a step toward the microphone. There is no such gift, I said. I never promised to hand over $25,000 for this wedding. A pause. Then my mother laughed, but it was sharp, mocking. My daughter, she said loudly, without a microphone, always thinks she's special but never actually contributes anything to this family. I turned my head toward her. If contribution only means handing out money, then maybe you should redefine the word family. A few people near the altar began whispering. I heard a faint, "Oh," then the scrape of chairs shifting. Kendra pressed her lips together. You've lived alone too long, you don't know what sacrifice means. Mom has helped you plenty. Yet when it's your turn, all you do is hide your money for your kid and act righteous. I lifted my chin, my voice steady. The money I have, I earned. I've been working since I was 20, and no one in this family ever asked what I needed. I've raised my son through projects I found on my own. I don't blame anyone for not helping me. But I will not let my child's future be sacrificed just so someone else's wedding feels complete. A woman near the front gasped, "She has a child?" and turned to the person next to her. My mother's tone sharpened, her voice harsh. That girl lives off others, keeps to herself, and now pretends she's always right. She has never once sacrificed for family. She's nothing, compared to Kendra. I turned to her. You've never asked how I live, and I've paid more than enough for the silence you call family. Matthew looked uneasy. He leaned toward Kendra, whispering something, but she ignored him. She was swept up in her own attack. You always think you're so capable, but if you really are, why does everyone only talk about me? Why am I the one whose name gets called in this family? I drew a deep breath, then stepped back from the microphone. I scanned the room. Every eye was on the stage. Some were sympathetic, some mocking. Then I bent down, opened the brown leather bag at my feet, and pulled out a carefully sealed folder. I held it high for all to see. Because everyone sitting here tonight is admiring the work designed by my company. This contract is proof. And if anyone here feels this venue is more beautiful than any wedding they've ever attended, then I'll gladly accept that recognition. I turned back to Kendra. You get to play the bride. But don't forget you didn't create this day. You only stepped onto a stage someone else quietly built. I didn't run from the stage. I walked down slowly, hand clasped tightly around Aiden's, my head held high. I heard whispers behind me, chairs shifting, and my mother's heavy sigh, but I didn't look back. I didn't need an apology. I just needed them to see that I had never been an outsider. And if they refused to share the light, then I would carry my own. I led Aiden back to table 23. No one stopped me, but I could feel the stares fixed on us. Some looked at me with pity, some with curiosity, and others with annoyance, as though I had ruined a perfect picture. I bent down to check on Aiden. He still clutched my hand, his eyes unsettled. I adjusted his collar, about to ask if he wanted some water when a voice cut through behind me, sharp and cold. Well done, Isolde. But you'll regret this. I turned. Kendra stood close, her face stripped of its usual poise, her cheeks flushed, her eyes blazing with fury. I recognized it immediately, the face of someone who had lost control, someone who had lived too long in a spotlight built by others, now dragged down. I didn't react. Aiden gripped my hand tighter. I instinctively shifted to shield him with my body. Kendra stepped forward, lowering her voice so only I could hear. "You're not taking anything from me. You don't deserve it. Mom was right. You're nothing but a burden, dragging everyone down." I met her eyes, silent, no words needed. The one trembling wasn't me. Suddenly, Kendra's gaze dropped to Aiden. I felt it instantly, the flicker that no longer saw my son as a child, but as a weakness to crush. "Too bad for the boy," she sneered, "growing up with a cowardly, selfish mother." And then in a flash, she bent down, grabbed Aiden's arm, and yanked. "Aiden!" I screamed, but too late. He fell hard to the floor, sliding into a chair leg. The crash of a toppled chair echoed across the hall. Silence blanketed the room. "Aiden!" I rushed to him, pulling him up. His elbow was scraped, blood seeping from his hand. His eyes were wide with panic, his breath caught in his throat. "Don't touch my son!" I shouted at Kendra. A gasp burst from a corner of the room. Then murmurs rippled like waves breaking. Guests rose, turning fully toward us. An older woman clutched her hand over her mouth. I held Aiden close. He trembled in my arms. I scanned frantically for tissues to stop the bleeding when hurried footsteps approached. "Matthew." He pushed through the crowd, his face pale. He stopped, staring at Kendra with none of the admiration he once had. "What did you just do?" he demanded. "She pulled away," Kendra snapped, her own voice betraying the absurdity. "It was a child," Matthew corrected. "A child, and you just knocked him down." "I didn't push. We recorded it." Someone called from a nearby table. "I got the whole thing." A young woman raised her phone, her face calm but firm. The screen showed Kendra yanking Aiden, my son falling, me screaming, then running to him. Kendra's face drained of color. My mother shoved through the crowd. "What's happening?" She looked at me, then at Aiden, clinging to me. "Her kid caused trouble," Kendra shouted, unsteady. "My son was pulled down," I said, each word clear, unwavering. "In front of hundreds of witnesses." "You're making this up," a man's voice boomed from the back. "I saw you grab him." "We all did." "What more do you need?" Chairs scraped. More guests pulled out phones. "Call security!" someone yelled. I stayed kneeling beside Aiden. He was still trembling. I lifted his hand, blood smearing the cuff of his shirt. Matthew crouched beside me. "We need to get him to the medical room now." I nodded. He helped me up, placing Aiden carefully in my arms. My son buried his face into my chest, stifling sobs. I raised my head toward Kendra and my mother. Both stood frozen, unmoving. "He's a child," I said, voice tight but firm. "What about you?" No one answered. I carried Aiden out of the hall. People stepped aside to clear the way. A hotel staff member appeared, guiding us downstairs to the medical room. Behind us, murmurs, camera clicks, and frantic voices swirled like a storm. But I didn't turn back. I clutched my son tighter, holding his trembling heart to mine, and walked on. Every step cut through the years of pain I had endured. And I knew in that moment a wound had been opened, but something vital was also about to be born. I sat on the cushioned bench in the hotel's medical room, my hand never leaving Aiden's shoulder. He had stopped crying, but clung to me as if anyone else approaching could mean harm. A medic cleaned the scrape on his elbow with antiseptic, so carefully that I could hear the woman's steady breaths. "Nothing's broken," she reassured gently, "but he may have bruising at the hip. If you'd like, we can take him to the nearest hospital for scans." I nodded. "Please prepare that. I won't gamble with anything." Aiden looked up, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm okay, Mom." I stroked his hair, kissed his forehead. "We'll still get you checked, just to be sure." The door burst open. A hotel staffer hurried in, tense. He held a phone in one hand, the other pressing an earpiece. "Excuse me," he said to me. "The police are being called. Some of the guests are demanding an official report for child assault." I wasn't surprised. I only turned to Aiden. He looked at me, not frightened, but with that same old question in his eyes. Why would family do this? I stood, gently settling him on the padded chair, and reached for my bag. From it, I pulled a thick file tied with a gray ribbon. Each page was printed on heavy stock, stamped in red with the seal of my company, Leighton Design Group. I looked at the medic and said softly, "I need to go back upstairs. Just for a minute. There are people who need to hear the truth." She nodded. "We'll watch him." I walked the hallway back toward the ballroom. When I stepped into the doorway, the atmosphere inside had changed. Guests stood in clusters, some replaying video on their phones, others speaking with staff. Matthew stood near the bar, arms crossed, his expression cold and weary. Kendra was no longer on stage. I saw her across the room, restrained by two event staff, arguing furiously. I strode to the stage, each step firm, the sound of my heels lost in the restless noise. I signaled to the audio technician, and he, looking as though he, too, knew what had happened, quietly handed me the microphone without a word. I stood there, under the lights, holding the contract in my hand. "I'm sorry for interrupting the celebration," I began, my voice steady. "I never intended to turn today into a spectacle. But since things have gone too far, perhaps the truth needs to be put back in its rightful place." I opened the file, pulled out the first page, and held it up. "This is the design and execution contract for today's event, signed between the New Astoria Hotel and Leighton Design Group. The seal is clear. The signature at the bottom is mine, Isolde Leighton." The murmurs stopped. I could hear the faint rub of tablecloth being smoothed, the clink of glassware rattling in trembling hands. Faces that had been indifferent now turned toward me, unblinking. I am the one who designed this entire space. From the arrangement of the chandeliers, the choice of centerpiece flowers, even to the LED screen displaying the bride and groom's names, every detail was done by my team, commissioned directly by the hotel. I paused, glancing down at the front tables. And the New Astoria Hotel, where we are gathered tonight, isn't just a random venue. The chairman of the board is a longtime friend of mine, Mr. Howard Greystone, who has trusted me with many projects before. He was the one who introduced me to management here, and the one who recommended that I oversee the technical organization of this entire wedding. A middle-aged man at the front sat upright, nodding slowly. I recognized him, an investor I'd worked with on a large property development in western Colorado. We had once argued for an hour over nothing more than choosing the right tiles for a community center. Kendra stood frozen. She couldn't push forward any longer. My mother stood at the left aisle, her face pale, all the steel gone from her expression. I stayed silent because I thought I had nothing to prove. I continued. I believed doing my work well, raising my son, and living decently would be enough to stop anyone from misjudging me. But clearly, some people still need to be reminded that all the grandeur they wear isn't always theirs to claim. I closed the file, my voice still calm. If anyone has ever thought of me as a shadow, then at least see how that shadow quietly built the stage you're sitting in tonight. Applause broke out from the far end of the hall. A young woman in a teal dress stood up, her phone still in her hand. The man next to her rose as well, then a small group followed. I didn't know them, likely guests of the groom's family. I didn't bow. I simply stepped down from the stage, quietly, as though I had just finished a final design, and returned the space to its rightful form. And I walked toward the medical room, where my son was waiting, not as someone leaving a party, but as someone who had finally called the truth by its name. I returned to the medical room as soon as I'd said what needed to be said. Aiden was scribbling on a blank sheet of paper, his legs swinging, his expression much calmer than before. When he saw me, he dropped his pen and ran into my arms. I bent down, holding him close, stroking his hair, my breath both light and heavy. Some things, once they happen, cannot and should not be undone. I saw you on the big screen, Aiden whispered. You spoke so clearly, you didn't shake at all. I smiled, shrugging gently. I may have shaken inside, but I had to stand steady on the outside. Like when we keep our balance on the windy stairs. Remember? He nodded, then leaned against me again. A hotel staff member appeared at the door, tapping lightly 3 times. Excuse me, miss. Layton. A few police officers would like to speak with you. They're addressing the incident in the main hall. I nodded, rising to my feet. I'll be right there. Before leaving, I told Aiden, once I'm done talking, we'll go to the hospital for a checkup, okay? Yes. But Mom, don't let them make you sad. I froze for a moment at his words, then squeezed his hand gently before stepping out. The sight that met me back in the rotor. Ballroom looked like a crack splitting across a glossy painting. No music. No bouquet in the bride's hand. Matthew stood at the center of the hall, no longer polite or restrained. His eyes were hard, his voice loud and clear. We apologize to everyone who had to witness the unthinkable today. But this wedding is officially over, right here. I heard someone gasp, "Oh my God," near the aisle. A glass shattered on the floor. Matthew's family stood nearby. His mother, in a pearl-colored gown, clutched her husband's hand as if to keep them both from screaming aloud. She stepped forward, then turned toward Kendra, who stood pale and frozen in a corner. Our family cannot accept someone like this. You assaulted a child. In front of hundreds of people. And you, she turned toward my mother. You stood there, did nothing to stop it, didn't apologize, didn't intervene. Is that the family value you've been preaching? My mother couldn't speak. Kendra blinked rapidly, as though she couldn't believe what was happening. She's making it up, Kendra shrieked, but her voice was drowned in the rising tide of outrage. A young guest, still holding up a phone, spoke loudly. I've been live streaming this whole time. Over 3,000 people are watching. If anyone wants proof, check my page. A man, likely one of Matthew's business associates, growled. Child assault. Humiliating your own kin. Sponging off others and then demanding money. Disgusting. Kendra looked around, desperate for support. No one met her eyes with sympathy. Those who once applauded her entrance now stood cold as stone. Some looked away, others frowned in disdain. I stood at the back, not stepping forward, not saying a word. A police officer approached me. He acknowledged me with his eyes, then spoke gently. We've reviewed the video. We also have statements from 3 witnesses present at the time of the incident. I nodded. I'm ready to cooperate. But my son needs to be checked first. Can I give my statement afterward? Of course. The noise in the hall grew louder. Some guests left, others streamed live, while urgent calls echoed through the room. Matthew bent down, picking up the microphone that had fallen to the floor. I cannot marry someone like this, he said firmly. This is final. My family will not have our name tied to violence and deceit. He turned and walked away. His parents followed, then several friends. Each step on the marble floor sounded like a closing bell. Kendra screamed, No! Matthew! You can't do this! I've planned this day for a whole year. Matthew didn't turn back. His reply was quiet, but I heard every word. Some things don't take a year to realize. One moment is enough. The words cut like the final blow. Then silence fell over the hall, as though everyone simultaneously understood it was all over. No one had to push. No one had to declare it. It collapsed under the weight of its own lies, illusions, and arrogance. And no one wanted to remain in the wreckage. I turned, leaving that glittering hall with a feeling both light and heavy, every step no longer hidden in someone else's shadow. Every footfall a confirmation. I no longer lived by their definition, and I would never let my son be tied to such a false value system. The next morning, I woke in the hotel room, sunlight streaming through thick beige curtains. Aiden slept beside me, his arm wrapped around my waist as though, even in sleep, he feared being pulled away. I rose slowly, placed a pillow in my place, and stood, pulling on a robe. I stepped onto the balcony. The September air in New York was gentler than I expected. The sky above stretched blue and calm, oblivious to the fact that a family had collapsed beneath it. I opened my phone. Dozens of missed calls, unread messages, and social media notifications lit up the screen. An 8-minute video was spreading fast, showing the entire wedding incident. Comments piled up, condemnation, defense, shock. Some tagged my company, writing, "The woman they mocked is the one behind the beauty of this event." I didn't reply to any messages. I simply saved every video clip, downloading them one by one into a separate folder. Then I contacted the lawyer I had once worked with on a major real estate deal. Mr. Franklin Hartley, a calm man in his 60s, known for his steady hand in delicate civil cases. Isolde. His voice came over the line, deep and unhurried as when we'd met in Denver. "I've been following the reports. I think we need to act immediately." I nodded, though he couldn't see. "I need a protective order for Aiden. I can't allow Kendra or anyone else in my family near him again." "Do you already have evidence prepared?" "I have the raw video, the hotel's security footage, multiple eyewitness statements, and Aiden's preliminary medical records." "Perfect. I'll send you the emergency petition today for a temporary protective order. At the same time, we'll notify the prosecutor's office. Based on what you've described, Kendra could face charges of assaulting a minor, and your mother may be investigated for coercion and financial abuse." I closed my eyes briefly, steadying myself. "Thank you, Franklin. There's no need to thank me. This is the right thing to do. And this time, you won't face it alone." The call ended. I stood still for a moment, listening to the wind rush against the cold metal railing. When I returned to the room, Aiden was still asleep, his small face more relaxed than it had been the night before. I spent the rest of the morning working with Franklin, sending every file, signing official forms. By afternoon, I took Aiden to the hospital. There were no serious internal injuries, but the doctor recommended monitoring his mental health for a few weeks. I wrote down everything carefully, leaving nothing out. 3 days later, the police contacted me for a formal statement. I brought all the records. The officer leading the case was Lieutenant Clara Murphy, a woman in her 40s, sharp-eyed yet kind and patient. "We've also gathered footage from the hotel's fixed cameras," she told me. "Miss, Kendra Layton's actions are clearly recorded. We're submitting the file to the prosecutor's office. Given the public nature of the violence, it's very likely she'll be criminally charged." I nodded quietly. I don't want anyone in prison, but I can't stand by while a child is hurt with no one stepping in to protect him. "And as you mentioned," Lieutenant Murphy continued, "we are also examining Mrs. Diane Layton's responsibility in this case. She was present the entire time, appeared complicit, and failed to intervene. Several statements also suggest she created the financial pressure leading up to the incident." "I've lived under that pressure my whole life," I said slowly. "It's not easy to see, but deep enough to make a child fold her existence into silence." They thanked me, promising to update me on the progress. That night, in the short-term rental apartment on the Upper West Side, I received a message from an unknown number. "Isolde, it's your father. I don't know what to say, but I'm sorry for letting things go this far. I should have spoken up sooner. If you want, I'm willing to meet and explain." I read it over and over, neither angry nor moved. Some apologies only arrive when everything is already broken. I put the phone down, leaving it unanswered. Aiden was sitting on the sofa, sketching a picture of a house with an open door. I looked at him, then sat beside him. What are you drawing? I'm drawing our house in the future, with big windows, a kitchen, books, and no one yelling at you. I stayed quiet for a long time before speaking. We'll build that house, sweetheart, with the right things. And inside me, something closed. Yet something else began to bloom like a bud after a long storm. Time moved like a quiet stream, not rushing, but strong enough to wash away what was old and clinging. Aiden slowly healed from what happened in New York. He no longer woke screaming at night, no longer startled when someone raised their voice in a room. Instead, he returned to his habit of reading before bed, sketching houses of the future in brighter colors, and calling me into his room just to share a new idea about a kitchen sink facing the garden. We returned to Denver after nearly a month. The little house welcomed us back with its familiar quiet warmth. Neighbors brought baked goods to our door. Aiden's classmates sent welcome cards, and a few close friends from my field hugged me tightly without asking questions, their eyes saying everything. I was still me, but now stronger. Leighton Design Group not only survived the upheaval but grew faster than I expected. Orders increased, new clients doubled compared to the previous quarter. Some came out of curiosity after seeing the video, but most stayed because of the real quality in every detail. I opened a small branch in Boulder, taking on 2 interns from the interior design school I once attended. One of them was the daughter of the woman who had once invited me to lecture about psychological design. She sent a handwritten note. My daughter wants to learn how to design spaces that make people feel seen, just like you did when you stood on that stage. One morning in March, while I was adjusting plans for a community center in the South, our communications manager knocked on my office door, handing me a large cream envelope. You should open this right away, she said, her eyes gleaming with excitement. I opened it. Inside was an invitation to the National Sustainable Design Awards, held annually by the American Design Association in Chicago. Leighton Design Group had been nominated in the category Independent Business with Positive Social Impact, and I was invited to give a speech if we won. I looked at the letter, not feeling the glory of a fairy tale ending, but a quiet, deep peace. Perhaps because this came after so many wounds. Perhaps because I had learned not to depend on recognition to know my worth. The ceremony was held in a glass hall overlooking Lake Michigan. I wore a navy blue suit, simple, no sequins, just clean lines that embraced the body I had learned to cherish after every time I rose from pain. Aiden walked beside me in a crisp white shirt and fitted little blazer. He wasn't shy nor trying to show off, he just held my hand firmly. When my name was called, the whole hall stood and applauded. I walked to the stage, heart steady, a modest smile on my lips. The host handed me a glass award, saying softly, "You don't just design spaces, you're redesigning the way people see each other." I held the microphone, my throat dry under the lights. But then I saw Aiden in the front row. He nodded at me, and I began to speak. There are buildings we draw on paper, then raise with wood, concrete, and light. But there are other structures, quieter ones, demanding more courage that we must build from within. I'm not standing here only because of the designs I've created. I stand here because I was once a child hidden behind the spotlight, and I've spent my life creating spaces where no one has to be misplaced again. I paused, breathed deeply, and went on. I have a son who teaches me this every day, that love doesn't need to be loud, only timely and true. And that a real home isn't made of materials, it's made of how people inside treat each other. The hall fell silent for a few seconds before applause rolled in again, soft but steady like rain. I bowed, stepped off the stage, and Aiden ran up to me, reaching for my hand. Together we walked back to our seats, surrounded by warm eyes. I heard someone whisper behind me, "That's not someone else's shadow, that's her own light." In that moment, I didn't think of Kendra or my mother. I didn't think of what they had lost. Their honor, careers, and community's trust, all of it was now only the past slipping quietly away. I didn't wish them harm, but I no longer carried the burden of forgiving just to find peace. I kept only what mattered: a small hand gripping mine, a soul growing up in love and respect, and a family not defined by blood but by choice. The choice to love rightly, to see each other clearly, and to never wound one another for the sake of pride. I had stepped out of the shadow of a family that once confined me to a supporting role. And from there, I began rewriting my life, chapter by chapter, with the light I created myself. After that ceremony, as Aiden and I drove home, he fell asleep in the car, clutching the small award against his chest. I looked at him through the rearview mirror and wondered how many children have been hurt by the very people meant to protect them, and how many women have silently borne the weight of being dismissed simply because they didn't fit the mold their families expected. I tell this story not to seek pity, but to remind myself, and maybe those who have been through something similar, that we can stand up, we can build another life, another home, where our worth isn't measured by blind sacrifice or favoritism. If you've ever felt overlooked in your own family, compared unfairly, or endured silence colder than criticism, you are not alone. Share your thoughts with me. I want to hear your stories, your struggles, and your victories, whether you've already overcome them or are still finding your way through. Because here, we don't have to fight for love. We only need to be ourselves. If this story touched something in you, leave a comment below. Hit like so more people can hear it, and don't forget to follow this channel for more real, heartfelt stories about life, family, and the unspoken truths we've all felt. Thank you for listening all the way through. We'll meet again in the little things that might just change an entire life.